This is the Planetary Potential Podcast for those who are eager to explore entrepreneurship, innovation, and cross-cultural communication in exciting and interesting places around the world. And now, here's your host, Andrew P. Rowan.
Welcome to Episode 7 of Season 1. How can foreigners add value to a local startup ecosystem? This week, I chat with Greg Mitchell, an American investor who has been living in Peru for 8 years. Angel Ventures Peru, which Greg is managing partner of, is part of the Angel Ventures network originating from Mexico. Greg and I cover how he first gained experience in Latin America, the steps he took to find a job in Peru, and what have been some of the challenges working with people from different cultures. An important reminder that opinions shared on this episode are those of individual guests. For more information, please visit www.andrewprowan.com/disclosures. So let's head to San Isidro in Lima to get started. With me is Greg Mitchell. He is managing partner of Angel Ventures Peru, and we are at WeWork, Real 2, or Real Dos, co-working space, of course, as you might imagine, in Lima. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Andrew. It's good to speak with you and share about what I'm doing here in Peru.
So Greg and I met a few weeks ago. We were introduced by Swiss Contact, had a great first meeting, and then we both joined the Lima FinTech Forum before I left for Pira in the north. And now that I'm back, it's great to reconnect with Greg. I had the pleasure of watching him interview another interviewee for the podcast yesterday, Raji, and it was super helpful for me to get a better sense of what were the topics that were important to two major players here in the ecosystem. Greg is originally not from Peru. He's from the U.S. Could you talk a bit about how you ended up here in Peru and what made you stay?
Yeah, I've been in Peru for 8 years, but the story of how I came to Peru starts right after college, when I decided to join the Peace Corps, and I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Dominican Republic for 2 years, and that was over the time where I really became fluent in Spanish, and also had a chance to work and live in Latin America in issues related to economic development. My project in Peace Corps was working with community banks. So that was my first time living in Latin America, strengthened my Spanish skills a lot, and also worked in issues related to economic development. And I think probably around that time, I decided this was something I wanted to keep doing in the future. It wasn't a one-time experience for me. Probably Peace Corps was a one-time experience, but not living and working in other countries, specifically Latin America. So I really wanted to build on that. And I was happy enough with my Spanish skills that I wanted to keep working in Spanish. So I went back to the U.S. I gained much more experience in investments and private sector. So when I started thinking about going to master's programs, I wanted a program that would give me another way to enter Latin America. And the University of Pennsylvania has a dual MBA, MA program, and it has a strong language component. So I went to the Wharton School as an MBA student as part of a global program called the Lauder Institute, with the goal of coming back to Latin America. And that's what I did.
Now, prior to your experience in the Dominican Republic as a Peace Corps member, did you have any influence on your placement there, or were you surprised or pleasantly surprised that it would be the Dominican Republic? Like, did you have an interest in Latin America previously? Or was it that once you were in the region, you found ways to come back and to stay in?
I think a little bit of both. I was definitely happy there was Dominican Republic compared to Kazakhstan, which some people get. So I think in terms of climate and lifestyle, that was a lucky draw. But I had been studying Spanish all through high school and college. And it wasn't interesting to me. I went to college in Texas, so the U.S. Hispanic growth, U.S. Hispanic population in the U.S., the immigrant culture and presence in the U.S. is something that was very interesting to me, and I wanted to live and learn more about the other countries in the same continent as the U.S. So I did have an interest in Spanish. In Latin America, I communicated that to Peace Corps. They knew I spoke Spanish. So I think that helped prioritize this region over others. So I did prioritize Latin America, and it's a region with a lot of great countries. So I was happy to end up in Dominican Republic.
So then after grad school, you decided to come back to the region, right? Can you talk a bit about how you structured it entering from a different angle, the region from a different angle? Because you had mentioned before that you went to grad school to give you the opportunity, basically more options of how to approach operating here in a different way.
Yeah. It was a much less structured job search process than is customary for any, I think, MBA or university student. So it was a very one-on-one approach. And also one thing was very important was me taking people seriously, not in the sense of my technical capabilities, but in the sense of my real interest in moving to Latin America and working in Latin America. So I think it did help. I had a consistent storyline of why I wanted to work in Latin America, that I'd lived here before.
Yeah.
And the process was reaching out to people one-on-one. There was no formal job process. There are great companies, organizations, including the IFC, which is part of the World Bank, that I internshiped at, that have a global reach. So that's a great bridge to jobs like what I have now. But mostly it was reaching out to alumni and contacts I found and talking with them. And a lot of the interviews were in-country interviews where I paid for the plane ticket to come down. And I think it did take that proactive initiative to make sure that people took me seriously, and that was a lot of the interview process. I received much less technical, financial, business questions, and much more lifestyle, culture, why questions than the typical interview process.
Yeah, so I'd say perhaps on one hand, it demonstrated your commitment to the region, right?
Yeah.
That you'd get on a plane to fly for an interview. I imagine later stage interviews. You could probably do the first round over Skype or Zoom.
Right.
But then when you were presenting yourself to hiring manager or potential future colleague, the questions you got were different than what you expected. So does that mean that you prepared more for technical and business and more of a professional experience in the interviews, and the questions that you got were like, why do you want to live here in this part of the world, or prove to me that you understand the culture? Was that more of it in your experience?
Yes, and more of the second. I think that trust is a big issue in Latin America, and gaining trust takes time. So I think small signaling, including coming for an in-person interview or being patient over multiple interviews and without having a process, what was important to show that persistence. And there were some technical questions that I had prepared a little bit for, but much more of the preparation was with language and speaking in Spanish. Every country in Latin America has a different accent. There's different words and local customs. So I needed to make sure I was saying the right words in the right countries to some extent. And a lot of the preparation and the ways to gain trust isn't to prove I would know more about Mexico than a Mexican, but I think probably to take two standard interview advice to an extreme, and those two advice was research the company you're interviewing at, and the second is act as if you already work at the company. So I made sure to research a lot about the companies I spoke with, and that was another signal that I at least showed and make an effort and it's something I could do. And then partly because there weren't organized interview processes, and partly because I need to show trust. I would just work on a project that I thought might be a project that I would do if I worked for them, and I would just send it to them.
So you were
At a portfolio.
so you were adding value to the organization even before they had extended an offer to you in that sense. Like you thought whatever you were doing portfolio wise or project wise would benefit them, and so you would just send, for example, an investment memo to them, or what kind of?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I wouldn't say, I don't think I added value, but it was examples of investment memos that probably I would send them. I would imagine everything I sent them, they already knew the company. They already knew much more than they did, but at least it was some information and an effort on my part about around the areas that these investment funds that I interviewed at worked at. And I think that was an important step to show that commitment up front. And I think it relates to a lot of the work I do now. If I wait for an agreement to start working, it's very hard to build trust. But if you just start working on things together, then you build trust, and that turns into an agreement. So I've since then I've tried to remind myself of that example, that the way things have worked for me in Latin America is just start working, and then that starting to work leads to more concrete agreements and collaboration.
And that has been consistent in your experience here in Latin America, is to take the first step towards building up that relationship with the other party in order to demonstrate the trust, but also the potential for being a beneficial resource to the organization as well. And so when you were conducting your job search or the next step in your career search, was Peru prominent on your radar, or were there other countries where, had things gone slightly differently, we'd be having this conversation elsewhere?
Yes. No, I mean, I could have been any country. I had prioritized Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Chile, and I had a couple interviews in Central America. But I didn't really pick a country. I was more looking for the opportunity. And I'm really happy with the Peru worked out. I think being in a smaller country has made it a little bit more manageable for me to meet people and be part of a network or a group. And whether there might be more opportunities in Mexico or a bigger economy and bigger things going on, there's much more chance I would just get lost in that and not really feel like I'm a significant part of an impact in specific initiatives.
So from that perspective, then, once you had entered Peru and you were working here, at what point did you decide, like, Peru is a place for me to build a life, so to speak? Because that's very different from when you enter in as an expat or a foreign worker in a place. The mindset you have, of course, it's one of discovery, of learning, trying to get settled in, feeling like you've got your rhythm down, compared to, okay, like now I can see myself living here for longer than the initial contract period, right? Whether it's a year or 2 or 3 years, and you almost have a different approach to, because now you're thinking in longer time horizons, right? Can you talk a bit about how that process has been for you, or if it's just been something completely natural and almost as a second thought?
I do think it was deliberate, Andrew, and I remember telling myself that I was going to give myself 3 years. So moved to Peru, 3-year window, and at 3 years, I'm going to make it to 3 years. My goal is to make it 3 years, and that's my decision point. So it was a deliberate to make a strong effort. And I came to Peru by myself. I think one important factor was that I was working at a Peruvian company. It did have international reach and did have things throughout Latin America, but it was a Peru company. So I was a foreigner living in Peru, but I didn't feel like I was an expat in the sense of working for a foreign multinational that or the U.S. government living in Peru working under that umbrella.
Where you might have felt perhaps in the Peace Corps.
Yeah, maybe have one foot in and one foot out, and know I was going back, or have contemplated my salary, vacations, or moving. Like these weren't things. I was just working for a Peruvian company. It wasn't like on a salary based in the Peru, like with my colleagues. So that made it a cleaner break job wise.
Were you the only foreigner in that company?
At the time I was hired, I believe I was the only foreigner. There was definitely one person from Chile, and after I was hired, Spanish investment professional joined the team. But yeah, I was the only I was the only non-Latin American when I was hired.
Non-native Spanish speaker.
Non-native Spanish speaker.
Yeah. So when you first joined the team, could you sense what were the initial impressions from your colleagues, or maybe they divulged it to you at a later date once you had built up the trust? Because it seems like when you were interviewing, there was a lot of kind of skepticism at first, and I wonder if that also translated to the teams in the sense whereby if you're a foreigner, I think it can be a double-edged sword, right? The expectations for you, of course, speaking Spanish are lower than everybody else in a sense, but also I think sometimes it creates an unsure element of how to interact. Like, oh, can Greg eat spicy food? Or, how should we take Greg's outsideness into consideration in the local cultural context? Did you experience anything like that?
I would say constantly I would say constantly internally with my colleagues trying to figure each other out. I don't think Peru is a diverse country. I worked with colleagues that had lived in other countries, so they had experienced other cultures, but there aren't a diverse set of outlets or people to interact with locally in Peru, maybe compared to other cities with 10 million people. So I think that was a challenge for me, and I think the process of trust was a constant process, and there was no one click. It was over time being consistent and persistent, so that people would start to take me seriously and feel part of the team. I wouldn't say my first job was welcoming. It was a pretty demanding environment where most of my colleagues were content in their own existing circles. So there was there wasn't a general welcoming or extreme effort on their part to make me feel part of a group. So I would have to find different things to make to be a part of the group and to work effectively. One of the things I started doing was speaking in English to my bosses who all understood and spoke English so that I could be an effective professional and communicate effectively my ideas. And maybe communicate in Spanish to my peers or subordinates to be a part of their team. So I try to do different things and balance that out.
Wow. And so then once you made it to the 3-year mark, can you share a bit about what was the criteria you used to make that decision to obviously stay here in Peru? And how long ago was that? 4 years ago that you made that decision then?
Yeah. So in the first 3 years, I met a person who's not my wife. So that's a other major component that happened along with working for a Peruvian company. So I think the effort and the events in the first 3 years, which was my goal, made that decision at year 3 much easier.
Yeah,
I would say made it feel like less of a decision,
more of like a natural evolution.
More of a natural, yeah. And I think I did have to take myself out of the current circumstance and think about it, because every year of in-country experience in Peru makes me a better professional here, but also separates me a lot from anything that's happening in the U.S. or other countries, and makes it every year it makes me hard to think what I would actually do if I left Peru and where would I work and what I would do. So it was important to take that checkpoint.
On that note, wondering if when you return to the U.S., you experience reverse culture shock.
Mhm.
I know I do when I spend time, like 13 months outside or 20 months outside, and then I go back. It takes, I think, some time to recalibrate to the U.S. norms of interactions, greetings, especially when here you're saying basically good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone within your social proximity. Perhaps even your neighbors as well in your apartment building.
Right.
You sometimes don't even acknowledge you're in the same space with other people in the U.S., right?
Yeah, going back to the U.S. is difficult for me. I try to make a effort to go back probably twice a year, so it's not too long. Yeah, I think it is difficult. I think there's a couple of things that are different. Switching language is hard for me, and the way the greetings, because it makes interactions awkward. I mean, it sounds strange, but you just going back and thinking in Spanish or English, it's just it feels more awkward. I feel like I'm even more awkward than someone from Latin America going to the U.S. It just because it's just, I don't know. There's just a lot going on in my mind and figuring out where I am and what I'm doing. And I think there's so many more options and new things
in the U.S.
Yeah, I've been in Peru for 8 years, so in the U.S. a lot has changed and there's a lot more advancements that I have not experienced. And the amount of options in any situation is
even the supermarket, right?
Yeah, is much more than here. So it's pretty disorienting when I go back.
Is there anything in particular that you miss about living in the U.S. beyond the usual, like family, friends, and any moments or any experiences that you kind of reflect on nostalgia?
Yeah, the thing I miss most is the amount of local options to go to sporting events. Almost all towns and cities in the U.S. have a local college sports program or team, and it seems like almost in any city in the U.S. any night of the week you could go to college basketball game, a professional hockey game, and just there'd be something to do.
Yeah.
You could probably take public transportation too, and that I haven't found those options here. So that it cuts down an activity that I really enjoy that I don't. It's not really available.
So when you go back to the U.S., do you make a point to enjoy those kinds of experiences as part of your itinerary?
Yeah. So I tried to go to sporting events for just watch sports all the time. So just try to catch up.
Well, you can certainly watch sports from here, right?
Yeah, but it's different if you're just watching alone in your house compared to watching with other people. Even if you're just watching like at a bar or restaurant. But.
Yeah, so I think like in many countries, the grand spectacle of communal watching sports is the World Cup, right?
Yeah.
But wondering also, is there an expat community or several expat communities here in Lima? And in the time that you spent, I'm sure you've seen many people come and go, right? Some who started off like you, who gave themselves a firm deadline. Some who've moved on elsewhere in the region, others who went back to the U.S. And that kind of, I think, also changes your own orientation to a place. So wondering both questions, like, is there an expat community or communities here? And then also, how have you been aware of the way that you see living in Lima starting from, day one, 8 years ago compared to today or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I said in the beginning, Lima is not a very diverse place. I would say the expat community is small and also not diverse in the sense that it's either people working for governments or people working in the mining sector, and maybe one off between that. But there's not a lot of there's not a diversity of expat community, and most people come with a specific job to do a specific job, and that's that they have their own community in their workplace. But I have seen Lima becoming more diverse and more people coming here to live for a short amount of time. I think Lima is a great city. There's more options now than there were 8 years ago of things to do. So we have a great culture of gastronomy and restaurants here that people enjoy and come to. So I think I have seen a growth of the number of foreigners living in Peru, and that's been fun for me to be a part of as well.
That's exciting. Yeah. And then your own orientation towards living here in Lima. Curious if you've lived in several different neighborhoods throughout your 8-year journey thus far. And then, now that you are married, your lifestyle is different compared to when you were here as a single guy, or soltero, as they say. And then also, as I understand that you're expecting a new addition to the
Oh
family.
yeah, that's right. My wife and I are having a baby, so we're getting excited about that.
So yeah, congratulations on the expansion of the team, so to speak. So yeah, if you could touch upon any number of those as you'd like.
Yeah, we're really excited I've been here 8 years, so married for 4. So excited to join the team. My son's gonna be Peruvian, so that hopefully will be one more step in the process of making me feel part of Peru and a part of something just bigger than myself, being here, like you mentioned, soltero.
Cool. So on the topic of being here and your transition from first Peruvian company, can you talk about your role today with your current firm?
Great. Yeah. Right now, I am the managing partner of a fund that invests in startups in Peru. I work for a place called Angel Ventures, specifically for the Lima office. Angel Ventures is a regional venture capital firm, and in each city we operate. Lima is one of them. We have a local company that operates locally, and this local company is called Angel Ventures Peru. So I'm in charge of this company and the local seed capital fund that we run.
That's great. And so how long have you been a part of the team?
For 3 years.
For 3 years now. Okay. And looking back on those 3 years, can you share what have been some of the moments or outputs that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, I think my job at Angel Ventures, it's been a full effort in the Lima startup community. So Angel Ventures is the hat that I have that allows me to play in this game, this startup game. But because we're early and because the ecosystem, a lot of my peers are other people that are in the startup community, including entrepreneurs, and finding ways to interact together all the time. So I try to help and work on different initiatives in parallel. One of the things that I found is that going beyond from my first job where I was an employee, and now where I'm working in more leadership roles, is that not many people in Peru get excited about supporting an American to be successful. And the way I can be a leader here is not being a leader in the sense of necessarily maybe a typical definition of leadership or lead the charge. It's more kind of nudging and molding things so that other people can creating an environment where other people can be visible leaders. I don't speak Spanish as a native language. So I'm not the person to necessarily be a spokesperson in Spanish or lead teams. Like I probably would have a much better, would be much more effective at in English in the U.S. in my own culture. So I've seen it more as using my resources, but in a way that helps empower other people, which sounds a little bit, but it is really what I have to do. I mean, I have to find it. In order for anything I work on to be successful, I need to put other people in position to lead it and make sure it's a group success. Because no one wants to be a part of something that only I'm going to benefit from. That's not going to really fly in Peru.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that would fly anywhere, but interesting that the way that you framed it, and curious to dive a bit deeper there in the sense that if I understand correctly, you're using your position, your platform as a way to shine light on other folks so that they can be successful, whether it's extension of resources or helping them build out their own tools and frameworks through your own experience, and therefore their success becomes an extension of your success.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I measure my success by what other people are doing in the Lima startup community. And I think because the ecosystem, it only works if everyone's successful in interacting.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to, if that's working and I'm a part of it, then I feel like that's a success for me. I think what that looks like is a couple different things. If we talk about the role of investing from a fund,
Mm-hmm.
and going back to the part where it can't just only be about me, in order to raise money, raise a fund and invest the money, what we've done is not something where people come to me and I choose and that's it. Instead, a process that incorporates a lot of different people. I call it an open source investing process because we literally have a database of startups that me and my team and we meet, and then just show that to investors and start getting people together and create the process and space for people to meet each other. And then we can invest as a fund directly, but it's not because we've kept something a secret and because I'm the only decision maker. It's the opposite of that. We've been able to do it just because we include as many people in what we're doing as possible.
So in a way, you are sharing your deal flow with other investors in a formalized way. Not so there's a process behind that. And you also have the opportunity to co-invest with those other investors into whichever startups are investment ready, of course, pass the due diligence process. What have been some challenges to that model of cooperating in smaller communities? It's sometimes difficult to get folks to cooperate. One of the good things is that everyone kind of knows everybody. One of the kind of bad things is that everyone kind of knows already, knows everybody. So I'm wondering if you, as a non-Peruvian, you have more leeway in being more inclusive in gathering folks together. Sort of like at that event yesterday that we joined. It was a cross section of PetCap, Angel Ventures, Swiss Contact, Endeavor, and getting all of these different actors together to present this cohesive, stylized event. Right?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Andrew. And the reason when I talk about empowering other people and collaborating, it's not necessarily a special skill I have, but it's a role no one else locally in Peru wants to or can take because everyone knows each other and I don't, and I'm not part of any of those circles. It's much easier for me or someone like me to say, hey, let's all get together. These are people that they don't know each other, but they would never be in the same place for reasons that I don't quite understand. But if a foreigner invites them and all gets together, they'll probably all get together. So
you're like an impartial third party.
Yeah, an impartial third party, and like anything, any role initial role that I have or success that I have, I think it's easier because it's not a success or that someone else in their small group would have. So it's not I think it's easier maybe to collaborate with someone from a totally different culture, and I try to use the benefits of that to try to get people together in the same place.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, especially in my own context in
Mhm.
Vietnam. It's almost, sometimes you don't really know what's happening behind the scenes
Right.
or what the history of those relationships
Right.
are.
And that's a good thing.
That's a good thing.
You can play like the you don't know what's happening, so you invite a bunch of people and you'll find out along the way, but at least you have an excuse to not I mean along the way you have to understand all those dynamics, but
Right.
what I mean is the good thing is like no one's gonna do that because they all know each other. But if you that's a role that someone like me can have, and in a startup community especially, I think interactions and connections are extremely important. So we just have to like power that up as much as possible.
Yeah. I want to talk about another role that you have here in the startup ecosystem,
Mhm.
and that's as a content creator
Mhm.
with Ruta Startup.
Right.
Can you talk a bit about how you came to decide to start writing about startups here and for the Peruvian audience? And I suppose anyone who's interested in the Peruvian ecosystem in general, right? It's accessible worldwide, the website. And yeah, please share the website as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So we have a website called Ruta Startup. It's not the best website. It's www.ruta and then the hyphen and startup.com. And we share stories about the Lima startup ecosystem. I had some great mentors that helped me, that motivated me to start writing, and the benefits in startup communities of writing and sharing stories. Principally, the person was Chris Havley of Techstars, and he encouraged me and other people as leaders of the startup ecosystem to start writing. I should say actors of the startup ecosystem. The real leaders are entrepreneurs. They need to launch companies. So they don't have necessarily time to sit down and write. But my job and other people is to write their stories for them and create a platform that makes it really easy for them to just share a story. So Ruta Startup, maybe I write once or twice a week, and also invite entrepreneurs to write, and hopefully in a way it's just really easy for them to write something and upload it, and there's already people looking at it. So the initial effort of setting up the website and how to post, me and other people do that, so it's easier for people to post,
To contribute. Yeah.
to contribute. So it's been a great way to share information. I do think I'm a privileged position in the ecosystem because I talk with so many different people, and it's important just to get that out. And there are issues and there's not, if I just wait for one-on-one meetings to share stuff, it's not scalable and it's not going to get to enough people fast enough to accelerate the learning curve. I think that's another thing that another reason that I have to share this information and write. Otherwise, things just keep in my head, and and I can't go to sleep, and I'm thinking about all these issues. And if I just start to put them in writing, it starts that dialogue.
That's Go ahead.
And I would say one other thing that is important, that was a hard decision initially, is that I write in English, which I think has been fun because everyone I talk to in the ecosystem, I talk to in Spanish. But people now read what I write in English. I really think they have a better sense of my personality and how I think than they do by just interacting with me on a daily basis. My communication, my day-to-day communication is pretty basic, and my personality doesn't quite come through in Spanish. So I think it helps. It helps. It's kind of a little bit of a cleansing and sharing my personality too, which I think has been a fun part. I was really expecting.
Now, when you're meeting new people, can you tell if they've read your blog or not, depending on the conversation that you have with them? Like, will they reference posts? And also on the flip side, has anyone surprising like reached out to you as a result of this content creation?
Yeah. So more the latter, where it's been fun that people write to me, and it's been a way to connect with people. So that's been a great way. By just putting something out there, it gives people gives a sense of who I am, and maybe makes it easier for more approachable to contact me and try to connect. So I think that's been a fun part of writing the blog. I think I can tell when people haven't read the blog because I put ideas up and they either bring up the issue or I realize that I put something they haven't read, which is a good reminder for me because it makes me remember that I need to keep any ideas. We just need to share them over and over and over.
So when that situation comes up and you're in the middle of a conversation with somebody and it's clear that they haven't read one of your posts that you've gone into detail about, do you sort of pause and say, let me send you a link to this post?
Yeah.
Because then afterwards, the next time we meet, we can have a much more efficient conversation about it. And then you kind of redirect the conversation to another part. Or do you just let them like keep talking about their opinions?
That is a good idea. That what you said is going to be my new tactic, because I don't quite like interrupt them to say you should read my blog, but yeah, I try to say something similar to what I've written about, and then maybe after the meeting I'll send them a link to the blog.
Yeah, because I'm just trying to think of the time savings, right?
Right. Yeah.
If you add that 5 or
That's the
6
goal.
times, even
Yeah.
like that's more time that you have
Yeah.
to spend on other activities.
And that's the reason I write the blog. It has actually meant that I take less meetings, which I used to feel bad about. But now I know that those hours I'm spending sharing more information, making future meetings more targeted, more productive. So yeah, I actually probably meet less people than I used to, but I hope they're meeting each other. So that's
On that note, with meeting new people and taking meetings, do you find yourself making a lot of introductions to people via email?
Yeah.
And what's the preferred medium that you use? Is it email? Is it Facebook? Is it LinkedIn? So in Vietnam, Facebook is as normal as email for doing introductions. You're lucky if it's double opt-in if you're on the receiving end.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's been a hard thing for me to manage. I think my initial tendency is very formal and double opt-in intros by email, and I still do that, especially if it's an intro that I suggest that I really want to happen for personal reasons, for angel ventures, or for things like to show that formality. I think both because I live in Peru and because I work in a startup ecosystem, which are both for both those different reasons, I've gone much more to WhatsApp and direct intros on WhatsApp, which used to seem a little bit intrusive to me. But we're on WhatsApp so much during the day. WhatsApp has replaced my email in a lot of sense. So it makes
within the organization or externally?
Both.
Wow.
So I might be on WhatsApp 2 hours a day. That's my main form of communication. So, and I've also learned in the startup communities, especially new ones, that double opt-in intros is just too much time and too much barriers. What I try to do is have a few people where they say, Greg, you can make any intros you want. You have my pre-approval for any intro.
Yeah.
And I try to get to that point. So I have started to do more intro through WhatsApp, just to get people connected quickly and informally and reduce barriers. So it is a balance between reducing barriers to intros in order to connect people as much as possible and making sure it's a solid, warm intro that something's going to come to increase the probability something's going to happen out of this.
And it takes time to craft an email that is reflective of both the appropriate amount of context for each person,
Yeah.
and then what are some potential areas to start the conversation that they can then take and lead in their own direction. I find that when I do an introduction on Facebook or LinkedIn, it's collapsed to a paragraph as opposed to two distinct paragraphs in a more formal email. Simply because it's harder to format, or the formatting is different on Facebook. And then what's up? Of course, you create the group. Sometimes there's a lag, though. You'll create the group, and then you want to have that message ready to fire it away. Otherwise, everyone's in a group, and there's nothing happens. Same with Facebook. As soon as you create a group on Facebook, everyone's aware that the group has been created. So wondering if you change certain things, the formality or the tone, depending on which medium you use for introductions.
Yeah, I do. And I usually spend a lot of time trying to understand how the person wants to make the intro. So even when I do a double opt-in, one part of that is asking, what's the best way for me should we do email? Should we do WhatsApp? What's the best way to connect you? So I try to tailor it to the person that's making the intro, and also the specific ask. Maybe it's just something needs to happen that day, or maybe it's more of this is serious. We want to make a long-term thing. I want this to be an email in your inbox that you're looking at and taking time to look.
Do you also do introductions in person? For example, make plans to have dinner with two parties that you really want to bring together, and so you're the kind of bridge between the two? Or do you find most of your introductions just like email or WhatsApp?
Yes, I like to. We invite entrepreneurs and their partners to our house for dinner. So usually it's like 5, either partners or their co-founders. So usually it's like get 10 people together, and it's another type of space where it's the type of invite that they personally wouldn't send, but it's easy for like a foreigner like me to just like, hey, let's have a dinner party, which is not something usually would happen. But so yeah, and I can be strategic about who to invite and how that would work together. People that don't know each other and why they should meet
and placements
and things
as well.
like that, and the placements. So that's what I have done. If it's just a one-on-one, usually I prefer not to be there when they meet. But yeah, I do. We do like dinner parties at our house to have people meet.
That sounds wonderful. And I'm realizing that no one's really cracked introductions, digital introductions in a sense, right? It's still all manual, for better or for worse, right? You don't want to also be making haphazard introductions unless there's a real anchor between the two parties.
But you said something important about making a group on Facebook. It really does need to be like small and incremental. When I think about getting people together and collaborating, what doesn't work is sending an email to 30 people like, hey, let's meet up for lunch. Oh, it needs to be maybe one person lunch. Hey, we should invite this person. Okay, maybe another person. So intros and making a snowball effect in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
It needs to be thought out, and it needs to be open and transparent, but not a free for all. There needs to be a little purpose and incrementality, if that's a word, in what we're doing in the intros we make. And I think another part of the intros that I do, and I'm a little bit obsessive about this, so it gets a little awkward, is like following up and say, hey, did you meet that person? How did it go? Reminding people when the introduction was made, how it was made, because I think that helps make sure any intro is maintained over time, and I can gauge whether it worked out, and also accountability for the person that asked for the intro. On that, so that there is something that builds off of it. I try to find positive ways to do it, but remind people a lot of how we met or how they met or how things connected, because I think it reiterates how this is all working. And also it's a good excuse to solidify the relationships that we have.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it strengthens a community, the ecosystem, and ideally, the next time you run into them, or the feedback is like effusive praise for having seen that connection and nudge people towards shared collaboration or a shared great experience at the very least.
And what's exciting, Andrew, is that when the ecosystem starts to work, which I think we're at the point now and prove where it is that each of us get simultaneously intros or recommendations from similar people. So, but it's a good thing. Someone would say, "Hey, Greg, remember I introduced you to that person?" And they're right, but maybe someone else also had, or there was an event where I also met them. So I can just say, like, this is great. Thank you for the introduction. Like, big part of that. But it does, but all that also there were many other channels and intros to meet different people. So I would say now me and other people in the ecosystem, we get intros to the same people over time. And if we didn't get an intro, we would have a month later. So that's good.
Yeah, no, definitely in terms of casting a wide net
Yeah.
in the ecosystem. Curious if all these introductions that we're talking about are Lima centric, or is it across the country? I know Peru is very centralized, and most of the resources, most of the activity in the ecosystem is located here.
Yeah, I would say it's Lima centric.
Lima centric.
So this is a little bit of this is a blind spot for me. I think that Lima is a lot of Peru, and we're just getting off the ground in Lima. So I think that's kind of my excuse is to focus primarily on Lima. But we are seeing entrepreneurs move to Lima to keep growing their companies, and we are seeing incubator programs like Pura, where you've been, which is the best, one of the best ones we've run across, and it's something. It's something that we could do better, and it requires people from Lima visiting other cities and them coming to visit us, which is actually a great. I used to think it was strange that a lot of the support we're given is for plane tickets. And I mean support by we're funded by government or multilateral programs. But it's really there's a value in just and now I want to spend more budget on just traveling just so we can meet more.
Yeah, there's no substitute for in-person relationship building, especially when it comes to rapport. That's something I also noticed in Southeast Asia as well. Like there's no way that you can recreate that experience on a call or even a video call, especially if you have network connectivity issues.
And this is also one thing where the entrepreneurs lead the way on, because there'll be an incubator in another city. We're in Lima, and it probably takes a couple coordinations for a first phone call between Angel Ventures and that incubator. But by that time, there's already entrepreneurs in that incubator calling us, or entrepreneurs in Lima selling in provinces and other cities, secondary cities. So like we're always going to be one step behind the entrepreneurs, but we can. The more information we share, and the more we can help the entrepreneurs make those connections.
Yeah, for sure. Ultimately, they are at the center of the ecosystem, and everything should be done with them in focus. As we draw to a close, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about anything I didn't ask you about, whether it's about Lima or Peru or you and your background, or even if you'd like to share, for example, what's the best advice you've ever received. So this is that opportunity.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. And I think I would like to talk more about the startup community. This is something I'm still learning about. And you mentioned keeping the entrepreneurs at the center, and that's true, and making sure to reiterate that and what that means. But I think more and more when I'm learning about startup communities, I'm starting to extend to other aspects of my life, and I think it all applies. The benefits of connecting, creating space for people to meet, mutual dependence, that success. No one can have success alone, And but if you do work together, like there'll be like the tide always, the boats, what's the tide rising?
The rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another problem I have speaking Spanish. I forget how the saying, but that's what I'm trying to say. The pie is growing, the rising tide all. These are things that are tangibly true in startup communities. So it makes me see how true those things are. And I think the approach we've had at Angel Ventures, working in a early ecosystem and working in venture capital and an asset class that doesn't really exist in Peru and is barely existing in Latin America, we have to work on a lot of different levels to close that gap. I think in places where there's deep capital markets or deep communities, it's skills are very specialized and specific actors are very specialized. When that doesn't exist, it's a process of helping in a lot of different levels.
Yeah.
And over time, sharing a value proposition and finding that specialization. Because in the beginning, we're just all doing the same thing, working together. But we can't just keep all doing the same thing. We need to find a way to work together, but do different things.
Complementary
things.
Yeah.
So I think those are kind of like the basic things I learned in primary school that really work in a startup community, and that's helping me learn them again. And I think so far in Peru, we've seen that working over the past 3 years as we've watched entrepreneurs grow companies and be successful.
Yeah, that's quite exciting, and definitely looking forward to seeing what the next 3 years and beyond have in store for the Peruvian ecosystem now that I've had the opportunity to spend some time here. Thank you for your time, Greg. I really enjoyed our chat and for sharing what it's been like in your 8 years here living in Peru. Looking forward also to seeing what Angel Ventures has in store, both for Peru and the region. And until next time, take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
The work that Greg described is critical to bringing different parts of the startup ecosystem together, and at times, it's difficult to find the right balance and appropriate role as someone who is coming from another country. In the course of speaking with Greg, I found him to be remarkably thoughtful and reflective about being a foreigner in Peru. His deep interest and experience in the region, and of course in Peru, is obvious when looking at his organic entry into the region and his adaptable and multifaceted approaches to living and working in Peru. Thanks for sharing your insights, Greg. I appreciated it. I hope you'll join me next week when we sit down with a female founder who is sharing the power of coding with young people in Lima. Thanks for listening, and feel free to reach out with any feedback, questions, comments, or concerns that you might have.